It was late October, the air crisp with the promise of winter. Daniel had been driving down a lonely stretch of highway in rural Pennsylvania, his headlights carving through the darkness. He had spent the day visiting his parents and was now making the long drive back to his apartment in the city. The road was empty, save for the occasional sign pointing toward forgotten towns. It was just past midnight when he saw her. A young woman stood by the side of the road, her long hair cascading over her shoulders. She wore a pale blue dress, outdated but elegant, and no jacket despite the cold. She didn't wave or signal, just stood there with a vacant, almost sorrowful expression. Daniel hesitated. He wasn't in the habit of picking up hitchhikers, especially not in the dead of night, but something about her seemed off. She looked lost, alone, vulnerable. Against his better judgment, he slowed the car and rolled down the window. "Do you need a ride?" he called. The woman nodded and, without a word, opened the passenger door and slipped inside. She smelled faintly of lavender, her skin pale under the dim glow of the dashboard lights. "Where are you headed?" Daniel asked, trying to shake off the unease creeping up his spine. She spoke softly, barely above a whisper. "Home. Just past the old bridge." Daniel knew the bridge she meant. It was a few miles ahead, spanning a narrow river, mostly used by locals. He nodded and put the car in drive, glancing at her from the corner of his eye. She sat perfectly still, hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on the road ahead. They drove in silence for a while. The road twisted through the dense woods, shadows flickering through the trees. Then, suddenly, she spoke. "Be careful on the bridge." Daniel frowned. "What do you mean?" She didn't answer. He turned to look at her, but she was gone. The passenger seat was empty. Daniel's heart pounded in his chest as he slammed on the brakes, skidding to a stop. He twisted around, checking the back seat, the floor, and nothing. She had vanished. A cold sweat broke out on his skin as he tried to make sense of what had just happened. He had seen her. He had spoken to her. A chill ran down his spine. With shaky hands, he put the car back in drive and continued toward the bridge. His headlights illuminated the old wooden structure as he approached. And that's when he saw it. A rusted guardrail. A crumbling section of the bridge. And beyond it, an old memorial cross, half buried in leaves. Daniel pulled over and stepped out, his breath visible in the cold night air. He approached the cross, brushing away the debris. The name was barely legible, but the date stood out. October 31st, exactly 10 years ago. He stared at it, heart hammering. Then he noticed something that made his blood run cold. Draped over the base of the cross was a faded, pale blue dress. Daniel didn't sleep that night. And he never drove that road again. Daniel stood frozen, staring at the dress. The cold October wind rustled the leaves around him, but he barely noticed. His mind reeled, trying to process what he had just experienced. He had picked up a woman. He had spoken to her. He had seen her sitting beside him, and now she was gone. A rustling sound from the woods made him spin around, his breath catching in his throat. The tree stood silent, unmoving, but something felt wrong. It was the kind of wrong that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up, the kind that sent a deep, primal warning through his body. Something was watching him. His eyes darted back to the memorial cross. He hesitated, then knelt, brushing away the last of the leaves to read the full name. Lillian Carter. The name meant nothing to him, but the story was becoming clear. A girl had died here. And now she was still here. His pulse pounded in his ears as he scrambled back to his car. He yanked open the door, slid inside, and locked it, as if that could protect him from something that had already been inside just minutes ago. His hands trembled as he gripped the wheel. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. It's just exhaustion, he told himself. Stress. Maybe even a hallucination, but he didn't believe it. The road stretched out ahead, empty and silent. The bridge loomed just beyond the headlights. For a long moment, Daniel didn't move. Then, with a shaky exhale, he forced the car into drive and continued forward. As he crossed the bridge, his fingers tightened around the wheel. The wood creaked beneath the tires, an unsettling sound in the otherwise dead night. He kept his eyes straight ahead, unwilling to look at the empty passenger seat, and then, just as he reached the far side of the bridge, the radio crackled to life. A soft whisper. "Thank you for the ride." Daniel slammed on the brakes. His breath hitched, his hands shaking violently. He fumbled with the dial, trying to turn the radio off, but the whispering continued, low and distant, like a voice carried by the wind. He didn't wait to hear more. He floored the gas pedal and sped off, the bridge disappearing in his rearview mirror. He didn't stop until he reached the city that night. Daniel lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the events over and over in his mind. He debated telling someone, but who would believe him? "I picked up a woman who disappeared into thin air." He sounded insane just thinking it. Instead, he did the only thing he could. He looked her up. It didn't take long to find. An old newspaper archive, dated exactly 10 years ago, confirmed what he already knew. Lillian Carter, 22, killed in a tragic car accident on the old bridge late Halloween night. The article detailed how she had been heading home from a party when her car lost control, crashing through the guardrail and plunging into the river below. She hadn't been found until days later. Daniel's stomach twisted. She had never made it home, and last night, she had asked him for a ride home. He shut his laptop, his pulse unsteady. He wanted to believe it was a coincidence, that his exhausted mind had played tricks on him. But deep down, he knew the truth. Lillian had been there. She had spoken to him. She had ridden in his car, and for one brief moment, on the anniversary of her death, she had been real again. Daniel never took that highway again. He never told anyone what happened. But every year, on Halloween night, he thought about her, and every year, he wondered if she was still standing by that road, waiting for another ride home.